If you want to know more about my experience on being a traditionally published author in Belgium, then you have come to the right place. I will, of course, also answer the questions that you have sent in. And this video will be divided into sections so you can jump to the part that interests you most. First of all, how did it all start? It all started being an avid reader. I have always loved reading, and ever since I was very young, I started writing short stories and novels. I've always had a passion for writing, but at that time in my life, I didn't see it as a possibility to do something with it. I saw it as a hobby. But then at a certain moment, I started having this feeling of wanting to do something with the manuscripts that I was writing. And at the moment when I finished writing my debut novel, I had already written several manuscripts, but I didn't find them good enough to send them to publishing houses. And when I finished writing my first decent novel, I thought I was ready and I wanted to send it in. So it wasn't, very important to note, it wasn't the first book I had ever written, okay? So I sent it in to several publishing houses that I thought would be perfect, would be a perfect fit for my novel, which was a fantasy. It was a fantasy, like medieval kind of novel. Now, even in Belgium, it's the same as in America or anywhere else in the world, I think. You have to wait a long time before you receive an answer from a publishing house because they get so many manuscripts sent in every day. And so it took months and months of waiting for replies, sending in again, and then waiting again months for a reply. But then at a certain moment, after collecting many rejections, there was one publishing house that gave me a call, and they said that they wanted to publish my novel. And I was crying, like I put down the phone and I was like, this can't be happening. I was so overwhelmed. It was like a dream come true, because I was at this point where I really believed that if I failed becoming a published author, that I wouldn't 100% be happy with my life. I was feeling so dramatic about it. I really believed that my life would never be complete if my novel didn't end up in some kind of store. So I worked so hard. I did everything I could, and it paid off. And so this publishing house published my first novel, and I got a lot of help, a lot of editing tips, and I learned so much during that process of editing and rewriting. And ever since publishing that first novel, they published a novel of me every year. So I kept writing, kept putting out new material, and they each year published a novel. There was in fact one year that they published 2 novels because it was a duology. Right now, I have published 5 novels. They are in the bookstores in Belgium and in the Netherlands because we share that language. They're also there. And of course, I get so many questions from people who follow me online asking when I will publish an English novel because, you guys cannot read me. And that's why I decided to write an English novel, and it will be published in October this year. So anyone who's interested in reading my work can do so this year. This was a novel that was published last year in October, The Ghost of Versailles. And this is a historical fiction and a retelling of Notre Dame de Paris by Victor Hugo. He is one of my favorite authors, and Notre Dame is one of my favorite books of all time. I wanted to do something with it, and so I have written this historical fiction. It is not available in English, but my next novel, which will be published in October, is also a historical fiction, and it will be available everywhere. Now, of course, I have a contract with a publishing house from Belgium, which means that the book will not physically be in bookstores like in America, but you will be able to order your physical copy online anywhere in the world. And of course, here in the bookstores in Belgium and the Netherlands, the book will be available like always. I will be doing a cover reveal and give you guys more information on my upcoming novel very soon. As for the genres I have been writing, so back in the days I used to read nothing but fantasy, and I also liked to write fantasy. So my first 3 novels were fantasy, my 4th was a dystopian, and my 5th, I just showed you, is historical fiction. My 6th will also be historical fiction, so I kind of have found my new favorite thing to do, which is like a combination of fiction and history. So I think that will be the path that I will be following in the future. Now I will be moving on to the questions that you sent in. The first question was, thank you for your content, and what is the most difficult thing when you start a new project? I think the most difficult thing is not to get started, but to get to know the characters. When I start writing a novel, I don't know anything about my characters, whereas at the end of the novel, I know them like I know myself. And usually by the end of the novel, I need to go back to the beginning, to the first third of my manuscript and see what I got wrong, because I was just taking guesses in the beginning. I need to fix my characters because they have changed along the way, they have developed themselves. And so there's so much work to do. So getting the characters on paper is, I think, one of the biggest challenges in the beginning when you start a new project. The next question is, how did you start and where did you get your ideas from? I started very young, so I've always been writing, like I said in the beginning, and at a certain moment I just felt ready to send in my manuscript. And then the second part, where do I get my ideas from? I think it's a bit from everywhere, but mostly from the books that I read. Like, there's something to get out of every book. It could be a sentence, it could be something someone does, it could be a theme, it could be a dialogue piece, and the ideas start coming. And I have a separate notebook, and whenever something pops up in my mind, or I think, this is a nice project idea, I just jot them down in my separate notebook. But of course, movies and TV shows can also spark those new ideas. The next question is, how do you stay in your creative flow? I don't really have any issues with keeping my motivation while writing, mainly because I love working with deadlines and I give myself a clear schedule, which is also why I am able to publish one book every year. I write every day and I give myself, for example, when I want to finish my first draft within 3 months, I calculate how much words I need to write every day in order to finish it on time. And at the moment, my publishing house has a maximum word limit of 80,000 words. So I use that to the limit and I use my 80,000 words. So I just calculate to finish my first draft in, let's say, 3 months. I usually do 3 months because I like finishing the first draft rather fast. And I think those deadlines really help me to stay in that flow. What also really helps me is, for example, when I am writing something in a historical setting, I try to watch movies in that historical setting or that time and place in history. I gather artworks and images from that time, and I read books set in that certain time period, biographies of people who lived during that time, and this also really helps me to get myself immersed in what I am doing. Next question, is there or will there be an English translation of any of your books? Like I said, my upcoming novel will be published in October in English. Next question, how do you start writing a book? It all starts with this vague idea, and I never know beforehand exactly what I'm going to do, except for the time when I did my retelling. I knew I had to do a retelling, but I didn't know how to get started. I made several attempts, and this is kind of a thing I do. I always make several attempts, but my beginning always changes. So I just start writing, and I try to feel if it feels good, if you know what I mean, if it sits well with me. And usually when I just get started, when I sit down and I start typing, the ideas come to me. Now, when I have that first part on paper, let's say one chapter, I take a step back, I sit down with a piece of paper, and I work on an outline. I find it so important to just, before I proceed, just sit down and really think about what I want to do. So when that first chapter feels right, and I have a brainstorm session and I have an outline, I really sit down to do the work. Next is tips to plot your book. I have learned a lot from analyzing books, analyzing movies, and learning about the story structure. So evidently I cannot cover how you plot a book in like a minute. It would take a lot of time to explain, but I would recommend, if you are struggling with structure and just writing a book in general, then I highly recommend looking up story structure, maybe purchase some books on the topic, and also read books as a writer and not as a reader. And when you watch movies, you don't just watch for entertainment, but you start analyzing. How does the story start? What is the inciting incident that changes the protagonist's life? And so on. You just are going to analyze every detail. You also have so many videos on YouTube that you can use to learn from, for example, screenwriters. It is just, there are so many good things to find online. So really use all that is available to you, and you will improve your writing so much. Next question. Describe your process of writing. How many draft copies you have? How much do you write a day? Do you ever suffer from writer's block? And so on. So how many draft copies do I have? I have a lot of drafts. How do I work? I write my first draft. I take a break. And I need this break to like really distance myself, because I've been working at that draft every day, so many hours, and I need a break. Then I come back to it and I start fixing everything that needs to be fixed. But I'm not going into detail yet about the writing style itself, and I won't go in detail about my sentences and making them beautiful and so on. So I just work on the structure, on the big problems, and then I have a second draft. That second draft goes to the second round of proofreaders, other people, and they will also be providing their honest opinions about the entire manuscript. I take a break, I get the manuscript back, and I edit again. And then there's a third editing round of, another round of proofreaders going through. I get it back, I improve it. Then it goes to the publishing house. Someone from the publishing house is giving me their comments. I get it back, improve it, send it back to the publisher. Then the editor of the publishing house is going through the entire manuscript for a spell check. I get it back, improve it, and then it is done. How much do you write a day? When I'm in the actual writing process, I write every day for 1 to 2 hours. When I'm in the editing phase, like working with proofreaders, I get to take breaks. So it's not every day, and I use that time to do other things and to, just... Do you ever suffer from writer's block? I do, of course I do. But the trap is that most beginning writers will just say, oh, I have writer's block, and they will take a break. But that doesn't work for me. I need to really, when I'm stuck, never in my writing career have I ever had a moment where I took a break because I had a writer's block, and waited for the inspiration to strike. Never did an idea come to me just like that. Never. So I always recommend to not take a break and wait for inspiration, because that doesn't work. At least not for me. I have to sit down with a piece of paper and work through my problems. The most important thing to do is to go back and see if you have made a mistake. The reason why you're stuck is because you didn't do your planning before, or because you have made a mistake and you need to take a step back and see, would this character really do this? Would this really happen? Maybe you did something in your last chapter where they changed from one scene to another, and maybe that wasn't supposed to happen. Maybe it had to take another direction. Also, go back to what your characters really want. Go back to their goals. What do they want? What do they desire? Maybe you have made a mistake somewhere and you need to fix this. I have so many things that I do when I'm stuck. One of the most important things is to, when you are not finding a solution, you have to turn to someone and explain your issue. And having a friend who you can talk to and just explain what the problem is, that's so useful, because this friend can say one thing or ask one question and you can have an idea, and suddenly you're unstuck. So whatever you do not take a break and let it rest, because I can almost guarantee that the inspiration will not strike without you working for it. Next question, what genre would you choose? So as I said before, I am now into historical fiction and I will continue on that path. How do you and your publisher handle the international market and translated editions? So my next novel will be in English and it will be a paperback that you can order online, and it will be in physical copies available in the bookstores in Belgium and the Netherlands. There will also be a Dutch ebook for readers who cannot speak English but still want to read the novel. What inspired you to become an author? Nothing really inspired me. It wasn't something I wanted to do, but something I had to do, you know? I had to write. And I think it was mainly my love for reading that sparked the interest in trying to write something myself. What's your greatest achievement and regret? My greatest achievement would, I think, actually be a published author. I never forget how lucky I am, because so many people send in their manuscripts and so many people dream of having their novel in a bookstore and seeing their novel next to authors they admire, you know? And I never forget how lucky I am. And I will always be so grateful for this. And to be honest, I don't have any regrets until now, so that's good. Next question. What additional writing goals do you have for the future? I think my biggest dream was to actually publish something in English, and that dream is coming true. So I am so excited that anyone who wants to read me can finally read me. How long did it take you to write your books? So I've already talked a little about my process, and this really depends from author to author. But for me, writing a book from start to finish, including the editing process and everything that the publishing house does, it takes about a year. Which authors are your greatest influences? This really depends on the genre, because like I said, I started out writing fantasy, and I have always loved the writing style of Laini Taylor, and I've always admired the storytelling capacities of Brandon Sanderson. I also greatly admire J.R.R. Tolkien, but I would never try to write like him. He's just an author that I admire and that I love reading, but I wouldn't want to try imitating his style. As for the authors that I read now, I love the prose of French authors like Victor Hugo, Honoré de Balzac, and I really try to learn from their writing style. I also admire Tolstoy, and whenever I read them, I mark my favorite passages. I try to analyze what they are doing. How do they build up their story? How do they write their characters? And I feel like I have learned so much by analyzing the books that I read and by analyzing my favorite authors. And I think that's really important. Next question is, how do you do your research? Let me take The Ghost of Versailles as an example. I have read 5 biographies on the Sun King, Louis XIV, to really get to know Versailles and the time period. And for example, I also read a book about the police and how crime was working in the time period. And there were also so many things that I've used from this novel. So that's one of the things I do. I just pick up a lot of novels. I buy them or I get them from the library. The second thing I do is I try to watch movies, TV shows, documentaries about the time period. And whenever something I see piques my interest, I look it up and I do some more research on it. And then for this novel, I also asked a historian from Belgium who is known for writing history novels on Versailles to read my manuscript. I was so bold to send him an email, and he accepted. He said yes, and I was like over the moon. He read my entire manuscript and he commented on the things that I had wrong. There were like 4 or 5 comments, and I was so happy. And the final question, what is your writing routine? Like I said, my routine depends on the stage that I am in. So in the first stage of my first draft, I will be writing every day for a couple of hours. And my routine would, for example, be I go to work, I arrive about 1 hour early, and I write. I work, I have lunch break from 12 to 1, I write, and then at night when I have some spare time, I write. But I just make sure that I have my, for example, 500 words a day. Let's say I had a really bad writing session and things didn't really work out, and I've only managed to write 200 words, 200 words. So that didn't work out, and then I will be writing during my lunch break from 12 to 1. If I didn't hit my 500 words, I know that I will definitely have to sacrifice some time to write in the evening. When I, for some reason, cannot hit my 500 words, I have to add them the next day, and so on, and so on, and so on. So I always make sure that I reach my goal. Because if I don't, I know that I'll have to work harder the next day. So I would say that my routine is very deadline based. And then when I finish that first draft, it's all about the proofreaders and editing their comments. I hope you found this useful. If you have any remaining questions, leave them in the comments and I will reply to them as soon as possible. Thank you so much for watching.